The bullet had torn through his chest like hellfire, and Garrett Kincaid knew he was dying under the merciless July sun of Nebraska in 1878. Blood pooled beneath him in the dirt outside the abandoned homestead where the outlaws had left him for dead, his horse stolen, his money gone, and his life slipping away with each shallow breath. The world had gone dark and cold despite the summer heat, and he felt himself falling into an abyss so deep he knew there would be no climbing out. But then, from somewhere far away, a voice reached him, soft and sweet as honey, singing a melody he had never heard before but somehow recognized in his very soul. Garrett's eyes flickered open, though he could see nothing but shadows and blurred shapes. The voice continued, growing stronger, pulling him back from the edge of oblivion with invisible threads woven from pure sound. He could not make out the words, but the emotion in that voice spoke of hope and home and things worth living for. His fingers twitched in the dust, and he managed to draw a deeper breath, though it sent agony ripping through his chest. The singing stopped abruptly, and he heard the rustle of skirts, the quick intake of breath that spoke of surprise and fear. Footsteps approached, hesitant at first, then faster. Cool hands touched his face, and he felt the blessed relief of shade as someone blocked the sun from his eyes. "Oh, my Lord, you're alive," a woman's voice said, no longer singing but still musical in its cadence. "Hold on, please hold on, I'll help you." Garrett tried to speak, but only a groan escaped his lips. The pain was returning now that consciousness had reclaimed him, white-hot and consuming. He felt those hands moving over him, assessing his wounds with surprising confidence. "The bullet went clean through," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "That's good. That's better than it could be. I need to get you inside, out of this sun." He had no idea how she managed it. She could not have been a large woman, but somehow she got her arms under his shoulders and dragged him across the ground toward the homestead. Every bump and jolt sent fresh waves of agony through him, but her voice never stopped talking, encouraging, promising that he would be all right if he just held on a little longer. The interior of the homestead was cooler, and she laid him on what felt like a pile of blankets. He heard her moving around, the sound of water being poured, fabric tearing. When she returned to his side, she began cleaning his wounds with gentle efficiency. "My name is Zelda Lawson," she said as she worked. "I've been staying here for about a week. The family who owned this place moved on last year, and I needed somewhere to rest before continuing to Kearney. I'm supposed to meet my aunt there, though I'm starting to wonder if that was all a fool's errand." She laughed softly, though there was little humor in it. "I suppose we're both in difficult circumstances, aren't we? What's your name, Garrett?" he managed to rasp out, his voice barely recognizable. "Garrett Kincaid." "Well, Garrett Kincaid, you picked a fine time to get yourself shot," she said, but her tone was warm despite the words. "I'm going to pack these wounds with some herbs I found growing near the creek. My mother was a healer, taught me everything she knew before she passed. This will hurt, but it'll keep infection away." She was right about the pain. When she pressed the poultice against his chest, Garrett's vision went white and he nearly passed out again. But through it all, Zelda kept talking, her voice that same anchor that had pulled him back from death. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about losing her parents to fever 2 years ago, about the aunt in Kearney, who had written offering her a home and a fresh start. "I sold everything I had to make this journey," she said, as she wrapped clean cloth around his torso, propping him up with surprising strength to wind the bandage around his back. "Bought a wagon and a mule, packed up what little I had left. Made it this far before the wagon wheel broke beyond repair about a mile down the road. I managed to get my trunk here, but the mule wandered off, and I haven't seen him since. I've been walking to the creek for water and eating the provisions I had stored, trying to figure out what to do next. And then I heard the gunshots this morning, saw those men ride off and found you." "How long?" Garrett asked, forcing the words past his damaged throat. "How long ago was it?" "About 3 hours, I'd say. I thought you were dead at first, but something made me start singing. My mother used to say music had healing power, that it could reach into dark places and bring light. I suppose she was right." Garrett managed to focus his eyes on her face for the first time. She was younger than her capable hands had suggested, perhaps 22 or 23, with dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes the color of sage. There was strength in her features, a determination that spoke of someone who had faced hardship and refused to break beneath it. "You saved my life," he said. "Well, don't go dying on me now after all that work," she replied, but he could see the concern in her eyes. "You need to rest. I'll keep watch and change your dressings. We'll figure out what to do once you're stronger." Over the next 3 days, Garrett drifted in and out of consciousness, fever gripping him in its merciless claws. Through it all, Zelda tended him with unwavering dedication. She kept his wounds clean, forced water and thin broth between his lips when he could swallow, and sang to him when the fever dreams grew too dark and violent. That voice, that beautiful voice, became his lifeline, the thing he clung to when the pain threatened to drag him back into the darkness. When his fever finally broke on the 4th morning, he woke to find her asleep in a chair beside his makeshift bed, her head resting on her folded arms. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes and her dress stained with his blood. Something in his chest tightened, and it had nothing to do with his wound. This woman, this stranger, had given everything she had to keep him alive. "Zelda," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. Her eyes opened immediately and she sat up straight, reaching instinctively to touch his forehead. "The fever's gone," she said, relief flooding her face. "Oh, thank God, I was so worried. You were talking to people who weren't there, fighting battles I couldn't see. I thought I might lose you." "You didn't," he said, managing a weak smile. "You wouldn't let me go." She returned the smile and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "No, I wouldn't. I didn't pull you back from death just to lose you to fever. How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," he admitted. "But alive, hungry actually. That's a good sign." She stood, stretching stiff muscles. "I'll make you something more substantial than broth. There's some dried meat and beans left, and I found some wild onions by the creek." As she moved to the small stove in the corner of the homestead, Garrett watched her with growing awareness. She moved with grace despite her exhaustion, humming softly as she prepared the meal. He realized with sudden clarity that something had shifted between them during those fever-soaked days. She was no longer just the stranger who had saved him. She had become essential, necessary, important in a way he could not fully explain. "Tell me what happened," she said as she cooked. "Who shot you?" Garrett closed his eyes, remembering. "I was riding from Omaha to Kearney, had some money saved up from working cattle drives. Thought I might buy some land, start a small ranch. 3 men stopped me on the road, said they wanted my horse and whatever I had in my saddlebags. I should have just given it to them, but I'd worked too hard for that money. I fought back and one of them shot me. They took everything anyway and left me to die." "I'm sorry," Zelda said quietly. "I'm sorry they did that to you. Not your fault. The world's got cruel people in it. But it's got people like you too, so I suppose it balances out." She brought him a plate of food, helping him sit up enough to eat. The movement hurt, but the pain was more manageable now. As he ate slowly, savoring every bite, Zelda told him more about herself. She spoke of growing up on a small farm, of learning to read from her mother and work the land from her father. She talked about the loneliness after they died, the way the farm had felt too big and empty without their presence. My Aunt Martha wrote and said Kearney was growing, that there were opportunities for a young woman willing to work hard, Zelda said. She runs a boarding house and said she could use help managing it. It seemed like a sign, a chance to start over somewhere new. But now I'm not sure how I'll even get there. It's still 30 miles away, and I have no wagon, no mule, just my trunk and what I can carry. I'll get you there, Garrett said firmly. Once I'm well enough to travel, I'll make sure you reach Kearney safely. It's the least I can do. You don't owe me anything, Garrett. I did what anyone would do. No, he said, meeting her eyes. You did what you would do. Not everyone would have stopped for a dying stranger. Not everyone would have fought so hard to save someone they didn't know. You gave me back my life, Zelda. That's not a debt I take lightly. Something passed between them then, a connection that went deeper than gratitude or obligation. Zelda looked away first, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Well, you need to focus on getting stronger. We can worry about the rest later. The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm. Garrett's strength returned slowly but steadily, his body healing under Zelda's careful attention. She changed his dressings twice daily, her touch growing more comfortable and familiar. He began to sit up for longer periods, then to stand with her support, finally to walk short distances around the homestead. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future. Garrett told her about growing up in Texas, about his father who had died in the war and his mother who had passed shortly after from a broken heart. He spoke of the cattle drives he had worked, the hard men and harder country he had known. Zelda listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she truly cared about his answers. In turn, she told him about her childhood, about reading every book she could find and dreaming of adventures beyond the farm. She admitted her fear about meeting her aunt, wondering if they would get along, if Kearney would feel like home. I've never been anywhere except Missouri, she confessed. This journey has been terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met, Garrett said. Traveling alone across dangerous country, staying in an abandoned homestead, saving a dying man, most people wouldn't have that kind of courage. I don't feel brave, she said softly. I feel scared most of the time. But my mother used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. So I keep moving forward, keep trying, even when I want to give up. One evening, as the sun set and painted the Nebraska sky in shades of orange and gold, Garrett asked her to sing. I've been wanting to hear that voice again, he said. The one that brought me back. Zelda blushed but nodded. She sat on the porch of the homestead, and as twilight descended, she sang. Her voice rose pure and clear, carrying melodies both familiar and strange. She sang hymns and folk songs, ballads of lost love and found hope. Garrett sat beside her, his healing chest aching with emotion rather than pain, and knew with absolute certainty that he was falling in love with this woman. The realization should have frightened him. He had never been one for romance, had always been too focused on survival and worked to think much about matters of the heart. But there was no fighting this feeling, no denying the way his pulse quickened when she smiled at him, the way he found himself watching her when she moved around their temporary home, the way her voice seemed to resonate in his very bones. By the end of the second week, Garrett was strong enough to make short walks outside, though his chest still protested any strenuous movement. They walked to the creek together, Zelda carrying empty water jugs while Garrett moved carefully beside her. The July heat had not diminished, but the water ran cool and clear over smooth stones. It's beautiful here, Zelda said, sitting on the bank and removing her boots to dip her feet in the water. If the circumstances were different, I think I could be happy in a place like this. Garrett sat beside her, watching the play of sunlight on the water. What kind of circumstances would make you happy? He asked. She was quiet for a moment, considering. Security, I suppose. A real home, not just a place to rest temporarily. Purpose, something meaningful to do with my days. And companionship. I've been alone too long. I miss having someone to share life with, someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone who cares if I'm happy or sad. Those don't seem like too much to ask for, Garrett said carefully. No, but they are harder to find than you might think. She turned to look at him, and he was struck again by the intelligence and warmth in her eyes. What about you, Garrett? What do you want from life? He had never articulated it before, but the words came easily now. I want land of my own, a place I can build something lasting. I want to work hard and see the results of that work. I want to wake up each morning knowing I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and I want someone to share it all with, someone who understands the value of building a life together. He paused, then added quietly, someone like you. Zelda's breath caught and color flooded her cheeks. Garrett, we barely know each other. I know you saved my life. I know you're brave and kind and resourceful. I know your voice is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. I know that I think about you constantly, that I find excuses to be near you, that the thought of you leaving makes my chest ache worse than any bullet wound. He reached out and gently took her hand. I know it's fast. I know it's probably foolish. But nearly dying teaches you something important, Zelda. It teaches you not to waste time on things that don't matter and to hold tight to things that do. And you matter. You matter more than anything. Tears spilled down her cheeks and she gripped his hand tightly. I feel it too, she whispered. I've been trying to tell myself it's just gratitude or circumstance, but it's more than that. When I thought you might die, when that fever had you in its grip, I was terrified. Not just because I'd failed to save you, but because I couldn't bear the thought of a world without you in it. And I'd only known you for days. How is that possible? I don't know, Garrett said honestly, but I'm not going to question it. I'm going to be grateful for it. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. I know you have plans, obligations. I know your aunt is expecting you in Kearney. But Zelda, I need you to know that I want a future with you. I want to court you properly, to give you time to be sure of your feelings. But I'm asking you to consider the possibility of building a life together. Yes, she said, and then laughed at the surprise on his face. Yes, I'll consider it, more than consider it. I think I want that too, Garrett. I came to Nebraska looking for a fresh start for a new life. Maybe this is it. Maybe you're it. He pulled her close then, mindful of his healing wound, and kissed her softly. Her lips were warm and tasted faintly of the wild berries they had picked that morning. When they pulled apart, both were smiling, tears still wet on Zelda's cheeks but joy bright in her eyes. They returned to the homestead hand in hand, and everything felt different now, charged with possibility and promise. That night, they sat together on the porch, Garrett's arm carefully around Zelda's shoulders, and watched the stars emerge one by one in the vast Nebraska sky. Tell me about your dreams, Zelda said softly. The ranch you want to build, what does it look like? Garrett let himself imagine it fully for the first time in years. Nothing too grand, he said. Maybe 100 acres, good grazing land with a creek running through it. A sturdy house, not big but well built, with a porch where we could sit in the evenings. A barn for horses and cattle, some chickens, a vegetable garden, room to grow, to expand as needed. And most importantly, it would be ours, built by our own hands, something we could be proud of. It sounds wonderful, Zelda said. And Kearney, would that be a good place for such a ranch? There's land available around Kearney from what I've heard. That's why I was heading there. We could still meet your aunt, let her know you're safe. Maybe she could help us get settled. And if she still needs help with her boarding house, you could work there while I find employment, save up enough to buy that land." "We," Zelda repeated softly. "I like the sound of that word. We, us, ours. I've been eyeing me and mine for so long. Having someone to share pronouns with feels like a gift." They began making plans, speaking in hypotheticals that gradually became more concrete. They would rest a few more days until Garrett was strong enough for the 30-mile journey to Kearney. They would walk if necessary, though Garrett hoped they might encounter a passing wagon willing to give them a ride. Once in Kearney, they would find Zelda's aunt, explain the situation, and begin building their new life together. "I should write to her," Zelda said suddenly. "As soon as we reach town, I'll send a letter explaining why I'm late, telling her about you. She'll want to meet you, I'm sure. She's a practical woman, from what I remember of her visit when I was young. She'll appreciate that you're a hard worker with clear goals. Will she approve of us?" Garrett asked. A courtship that started under such unusual circumstances. "I think she'll understand that life doesn't always follow neat patterns," Zelda said. "And if she doesn't, well, I'm a grown woman. I can make my own choices, but I hope she'll be happy for us. She's the only family I have left." 3 days later, Garrett declared himself ready to attempt the journey. His wound still pained him, but he could walk steadily now, and the risk of infection had passed. They packed what little they had. Zelda's trunk, being too heavy to carry, was left behind with plans to retrieve it later. She took only what could fit in a canvas bag, clothes and a few precious items that had belonged to her parents. They set out at dawn, walking side by side down the dirt road that led to Kearney. The summer morning was already warm, promising another scorching day, but their spirits were high. They talked constantly as they walked, pointing out birds and wildflowers, sharing observations about the landscape, dreaming aloud about their future. Around midday, a wagon approached from behind, and they turned to see an older couple, the wagon loaded with farming supplies. The man pulled the horses to a stop and called out a friendly greeting. "You folks heading to Kearney?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Garrett replied. "We'd be much obliged if you could spare room for 2 passengers." The man looked them over, his eyes sharp but kind. "You look like you've had some trouble," he observed, noting Garrett's careful movements and the visible bandaging under his shirt. "Had a run-in with some outlaws about 2 weeks back," Garrett admitted. "This lady saved my life, and now we're trying to reach town." "Outlaws, you say?" The man's expression darkened. "There's been a gang operating in this area, robbing travelers. The sheriff in Kearney's been trying to track them down. You get a look at them. 3 men, all masked," Garrett said, "but I'd recognize their voices if I heard them again." "Well, climb on up," the man said decisively. "Name's Harold Mason, and this is my wife, Ruth. We've got room for you in the back. Can't have you walking all the way to town in this heat, especially with you still healing." They climbed gratefully into the wagon bed, settling among the supplies. Ruth Mason, a woman with gray hair and a warm smile, passed them a canteen of water and some dried fruit. "You 2 married?" she asked conversationally as the wagon rolled forward. "Not yet," Zelda said, and Garrett heard the happiness in her voice. "But we're planning to be once we get settled." "That's lovely," Ruth said. "Young love is a beautiful thing. Harold and I have been married 40 years now, and I wouldn't trade a single day of it." They rode for several hours, the Masons proving to be delightful company. Harold told stories about homesteading in Nebraska, about the challenges and rewards of farming the prairie. Ruth shared recipes and practical wisdom, the kind that came from decades of experience. By the time Kearney came into view, Garrett felt as though they had made genuine friends. The town was larger than Garrett had expected, bustling with activity on this summer afternoon. Buildings lined a main street, storefronts advertising goods and services, and people moved with purpose between destinations. It had the energy of a place that was growing, establishing itself as more than just a stopping point on the way to somewhere else. "Where can we drop you?" Harold asked as they entered the town proper. "I'm looking for my aunt's boarding house," Zelda said. "Martha Lawson, she runs it." "Oh, I know Martha," Ruth said with a smile. "Her place is just 2 streets over. We'll take you right to the door." True to her word, Ruth directed Harold to a large 2-story building with a painted sign reading Lawson's Boarding House hanging above the door. The building was well maintained, with flower boxes in the windows and a welcoming appearance. Garrett helped Zelda down from the wagon, and they both thanked the Masons profusely. "You were an answer to prayer," Zelda said sincerely. "Thank you for your kindness." "Think nothing of it," Harold said. "You need anything, you can find us at the Mason farm about 5 miles northeast of town. Good luck to you both." As the wagon rolled away, Garrett and Zelda stood for a moment, looking at the boarding house. This was the moment of truth, the beginning of their new life. Zelda took a deep breath and reached for Garrett's hand. Together they climbed the steps and knocked on the door. A woman in her 50s answered, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, her eyes shrewd but not unkind. She looked at Zelda for a long moment, and then recognition dawned. "Zelda, my goodness, child, I'd nearly given up hope. You were supposed to be here 2 weeks ago. I was worried sick." "I'm so sorry, Aunt Martha," Zelda said. "There were complications on the journey. May we come in?" "I have so much to tell you." Martha ushered them inside, her eyes moving between Zelda and Garrett with obvious curiosity. The interior of the boarding house was clean and comfortable, furnished with simple but sturdy pieces. Martha led them to a sitting room and gestured for them to sit. Over the next hour, Zelda and Garrett took turns explaining everything that had happened. Martha listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to shock to something that might have been approval. When they finished, she sat back in her chair and studied them both carefully. "So you saved this young man's life, nursed him back to health, and now you're planning to marry," she summarized. "That's quite a story, Zelda. Your mother would have been proud of you." "I hope so," Zelda said softly. "I tried to remember everything she taught me." Martha turned her attention to Garrett. "And you, young man, what are your intentions toward my niece? What can you offer her?" "Honesty, madam," Garrett said without hesitation. "I can offer her honesty, loyalty, and a willingness to work as hard as necessary to build a good life. I lost everything I'd saved to those outlaws, so I'm starting from nothing. But I'm strong. I know cattle and horses, and I'm not afraid of hard work. I plan to find employment here in Kearney, save up enough to buy land and build a ranch. And I plan to spend every day of my life making sure Zelda never regrets choosing me." Martha's stern expression softened slightly. "You've got a pretty way with words, I'll give you that, but words are cheap. Actions are what matter." "Yes, madam," Garrett agreed. "Which is why I hope you'll give me the chance to prove myself. Zelda mentioned you might need help managing the boarding house. I'm willing to do whatever work you have available in exchange for room and board while I look for other employment." "I could use someone to handle repairs and maintenance," Martha admitted. "The man I had working for me moved on last month, and there's more than I can manage alone. But I need to know you're serious about this, about Zelda. She's had enough heartache in her life." "I won't stand by and watch someone hurt her. I would die before I hurt her," Garrett said simply. "She gave me back my life. I intend to spend that life making her happy." Something in his tone must have convinced Martha because she nodded slowly. "All right then, you can both stay here. Zelda, you'll help me with the guests and the cooking, just as we discussed. Garrett, you'll handle repairs, maintenance, and any heavy work that needs doing. You'll have separate rooms, of course, until you're properly married. I run a respectable establishment." "Of course, madam," Garrett said quickly. "I wouldn't expect anything else." "Good." Martha stood, signaling the end of the discussion. "Let me show you to your rooms. Dinner is at 6. We have 4 other boarders currently, all working men from town. They're a decent lot, but don't stand for any nonsense." Over the following weeks, Garrett and Zelda settled into life in Kearney. True to his word, Garrett worked tirelessly around the boarding house, repairing loose boards, fixing leaky pipes, and maintaining the property. He also found additional work at a stable in town, caring for horses and doing odd jobs. Every penny he earned went into a jar hidden in his room, slowly growing toward their dream of buying land. Zelda thrived under her aunt's guidance. She proved to be an excellent cook and a gracious hostess to the boarders. Martha, though gruff on the surface, clearly loved her niece and took pride in teaching her the business. In the evenings, after dinner was cleared and the boarders had retired, the 3 of them would sit together in the kitchen while Martha told stories about Zelda's mother, her sister, sharing memories that made Zelda laugh and cry in equal measure. Garrett and Zelda stole moments together whenever they could. They walked through town in the evenings, Garrett's arm linked with hers, talking about their plans and dreams. They attended church on Sundays, sitting side by side and joining their voices in hymns. And sometimes, late at night, Zelda would sit on the porch and sing softly while Garrett listened from his window, that voice still as powerful and moving as the first time he had heard it calling him back from death. One evening in late August, about 6 weeks after their arrival in Kearney, Garrett asked Martha's permission to take Zelda on a longer walk. He had discovered a spot just outside of town, a small hill that overlooked the prairie, and he wanted to show it to her. They walked hand in hand through the cooling evening air, fireflies beginning to emerge as twilight descended. When they reached the hill, Garrett spread out a blanket he had brought and they sat together, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. "I've been thinking," Garrett said, his heart pounding with nervousness despite his certainty, "about timing and practical matters and doing things properly." "That sounds serious," Zelda said, turning to face him with curiosity in her eyes. "It is serious." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know we said we'd wait, that we'd take time to save money and get fully established. But Zelda, I don't want to wait anymore. Life's too short and too uncertain to put off the things that matter most. I love you. I've loved you since you sang me back to life, and I'll love you until the day I die. I don't have much to offer you yet, but I swear I'll spend every day working to give you the life you deserve. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring set with a small blue stone. "It's not much," he said apologetically. "I couldn't afford gold or diamonds, but the shopkeeper said the stone is called turquoise, and it reminded me of the Nebraska sky. I thought, it's perfect," Zelda interrupted, tears streaming down her face. "It's absolutely perfect. And yes, I'll marry you, Garrett Kincaid. I'd marry you today if we could. I don't need gold or diamonds, I just need you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and she threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. He held her close, mindful of his now fully healed wound, and kissed her with all the love and passion he had been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, the stars had begun to emerge overhead. "I'll speak to your aunt tomorrow," Garrett said. "Ask her permission formally, and then I'll talk to the pastor about setting a date. How does September sound? That gives us a few weeks to prepare." "September sounds wonderful," Zelda agreed. "Oh, Garrett, I'm so happy. I came to Nebraska looking for a fresh start, and I found so much more. I found a home, I found purpose, I found you. I found you too, he said softly, and I'm never letting you go. Martha, as it turned out, had been expecting the proposal and gave her blessing readily. I could see this coming from a mile away, she said with a rare smile. You're good for each other, that much is clear. And Garrett, you've proven yourself in these past weeks. You're a hard worker and you treat Zelda with the respect and care she deserves. You have my blessing and my support. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Zelda sewed a new dress for the wedding, a simple but beautiful gown in pale blue. Martha insisted on hosting a reception at the boarding house, enlisting the help of her boarders and friends from town. Garrett continued working every hour he could, his savings growing steadily. One afternoon, Sheriff Tom Bradley stopped by the boarding house with unexpected news. "Garrett Kincaid?" he asked when Garrett answered the door. "Yes, sir. I'm Sheriff Bradley. I understand you had a run-in with some outlaws back in July." "Yes, sir, I did." Garrett's hand unconsciously moved to his chest, where a scar now marked the bullet's passage. "Well, I've got good news for you. We caught those men last week, caught them trying to rob a stagecoach outside of town. When we searched their camp, we found quite a bit of stolen property, including items they'd taken from other victims. One of them was bragging about shooting a man and leaving him for dead. Based on your description and the timing, we believe it was you." "That's good," Garrett said carefully. "I'm glad they're off the streets." "There's more," the sheriff continued. "We recovered some money from their stash, and we've been trying to return it to the rightful owners. One of the men, trying to cut a deal, admitted they took about $200 off a cowboy they shot in July." "Would that be about what you were carrying?" Garrett's heart leaped. "Yes, sir. Maybe a little more, but around that amount." "Well, we can't be certain it's all yours, as they robbed other folks too. But we're prepared to return $150 to you, along with your saddle and some other personal items. The rest will be divided among other victims we've identified." "Does that sound fair?" "More than fair, sir," Garrett said, hardly able to believe it. "That's incredibly generous." The sheriff returned the next day with the money and items, and Garrett stared at the cash in wonder. With what he had saved and this unexpected windfall, he now had enough to make a down payment on land. The dream that had seemed years away was suddenly within reach. He shared the news with Zelda that evening, and she cried with joy. "It's like everything is falling into place," she said. "Like we're meant to be doing this, meant to be together." "I believe we are," Garrett agreed. "I believe you saved me for a reason, and this is it. Building a life together, creating something beautiful out of all that pain and hardship." They were married on a perfect September afternoon, standing before the pastor in Kearney's small church with Martha and the Masons as witnesses. Zelda was radiant in her blue dress, her dark hair adorned with wildflowers, her eyes shining with happiness. Garrett wore new clothes purchased especially for the occasion, his heart so full he thought it might burst. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett kissed his bride with gentle reverence, still amazed that this incredible woman had chosen him. The small gathering erupted in applause and cheers, and they walked back down the aisle hand in hand, ready to begin their new life together. The reception at the boarding house was a joyous affair. Martha had prepared a feast, and neighbors and friends from town joined the celebration. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts to the happy couple. As the evening wore on and the guests began to depart, Garrett and Zelda slipped away to the porch, seeking a moment of quiet together. "Happy, Mrs. Kincaid?" Garrett asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Zelda replied. "This morning I woke up as Zelda Lawson, alone in the world except for my aunt. Tonight I'm Zelda Kincaid with a husband who loves me and a future full of possibilities. It's almost too much to take in. We'll take it in together, Garrett promised. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. Together. They spent their wedding night in a small house Garrett had rented on the edge of town, a temporary home until they could build their own. It was modest but clean, with a bedroom, a kitchen, and a sitting area. Zelda had spent the previous week making it comfortable, adding curtains and rugs, filling the kitchen with supplies. As Garrett carried his bride over the threshold, both of them laughing, he marveled at how dramatically his life had changed. 3 months ago, he had been dying in the dirt, alone and defeated. Now he had a wife he adored, money in the bank, and real hope for the future. All because a woman had refused to let him die, had called him back with her voice and her determination. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Garrett spent his days looking at available land with the help of a local land agent, while Zelda continued working at her aunt's boarding house, saving every penny of her wages. They looked at several properties before finding the perfect one, 120 acres about 8 miles from Kearney. It had good grazing land, a creek that ran year-round, and a small grove of cottonwood trees that would provide shade for the house they planned to build. "This is it," Garrett said, standing in the middle of the property with Zelda by his side. "This is where we'll build our life." "It's beautiful," Zelda agreed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "I can see the house right there on that little rise. We'll have a view of the prairie and the sunrise every morning, and the barn over there near the creek. Gardens here where the soil looks richest. Oh, Garrett, it's perfect." They finalized the purchase in early October, signing papers that made them landowners. It was a momentous occasion, marking the true beginning of their dream. But they both knew the real work was just beginning. They spent that fall and winter preparing. Garrett worked during the day at the stable while spending every spare moment on their land, cutting timber for the house and barn. Zelda continued at the boarding house but spent her evenings sewing curtains and planning the layout of their home. Friends they had made in town pitched in to help, and slowly but surely, the house began to take shape. It was hard work, physically demanding and often frustrating. There were days when nothing seemed to go right, when problems seemed insurmountable. But they faced every challenge together, encouraging each other, refusing to give up. And through it all, their love deepened and strengthened, tempered by shared struggle and shared purpose. On Christmas Eve, they stood together in the mostly finished house, looking around at what they had built with their own hands. The walls were up, the roof was sound, and a fire crackled in the stone fireplace Garrett had carefully constructed. It was not fancy, but it was sturdy and warm, a real home. "Merry Christmas, my love," Garrett said, handing Zelda a small package. She opened it to find a beautiful music box that played a gentle melody when wound. "It's lovely," she said, tears in her eyes. "But Garrett, we can't afford extras like this." "I saved back a little from my wages," he admitted, "because I wanted to get you something special, something to thank you for everything you've given me. Your voice brought me back from death, Zelda. Music is part of who you are, and I wanted you to have this as a reminder of how precious you are to me." "I love it," she said, setting the music box carefully on the mantel. "And I love you, more than words can express." She handed him a package of her own. "Your turn." Inside, Garrett found a thick wool shirt that Zelda had clearly sewn herself, every stitch perfect. "You made this?" he asked in wonder. "I wanted you to have something warm for working outside, something made with love." They held each other close that night, grateful beyond measure for the life they were building, for the love they shared, for the simple miracle of having found each other. Spring arrived, bringing new growth and new possibilities. Garrett purchased cattle with the last of their savings, a small herd that would be the foundation of their ranch. He also bought 3 horses, including a gentle mare for Zelda. She learned to ride under his patient instruction, and soon they were riding together across their land, checking fences and watching the cattle graze. The garden Zelda planted flourished under her care, providing vegetables for their table and enough extra to sell in town. Martha continued to be a source of support and wisdom, visiting regularly and spreading the word about the quality beef the Kincaid Ranch would soon have available. Harold and Ruth Mason became dear friends, often joining them for Sunday dinners and helping with major projects on the ranch. By the time summer arrived, they had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch was established, productive, and growing slowly but surely. They worked hard from dawn to dusk, but the work was satisfying, purposeful. This was theirs, built by their own labor, a legacy they could be proud of. One evening in late July, exactly 1 year after Garrett had nearly died, they sat together on their porch watching the sunset. Zelda was unusually quiet, her hand resting on her stomach in a gesture Garrett had noticed more frequently in recent days. "Are you all right?" he asked with concern. "You've seemed tired lately. Maybe you should see the doctor." "I did see the doctor," Zelda said, turning to face him with a mysterious smile. "This morning while you were in town selling those steers. He confirmed what I suspected." Garrett's heart began to race. "Confirmed what?" "I'm pregnant, Garrett. We're going to have a baby." For a moment he could not speak, overwhelmed by joy so intense it was almost painful. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as tears streamed down his face. "A baby," he whispered. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Zelda asked, though she was smiling through her own tears. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Garrett said. "I'm blessed, honored, amazed. Zelda, you've given me everything. A second chance at life, a home, a purpose, love beyond anything I ever dreamed possible. And now this." "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Zelda corrected gently. "We found each other at exactly the right moment when we both needed saving. You gave me purpose and love just as much as I gave it to you. We're partners, equals in this life we're building." The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite the hard work of ranch life. Zelda refused to slow down significantly, insisting she felt fine, and that women had been having babies while working for thousands of years. Martha fussed over her, providing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Ruth Mason shared her own experiences of motherhood, offering both practical help and emotional support. As winter approached, Garrett insisted on hiring a young man from town to help with the heavy ranch work, refusing to let Zelda do anything too strenuous. She protested but secretly appreciated the help as her body grew heavy with child. On a cold February night in 1880, Zelda went into labor. Garrett sent the hired hand racing to town for the doctor and Martha while he stayed by his wife's side, holding her hand and trying not to panic. The hours that followed were the longest of his life, watching Zelda struggle and suffer, feeling helpless to ease her pain. But when dawn broke and a baby's cry finally filled the house, everything else faded away. The doctor placed a tiny, perfect baby boy in Garrett's arms, and he stared down at his son in absolute wonder. "He's beautiful," Garrett whispered, carrying the baby to where Zelda lay exhausted but radiant, just like his mother. "He has your eyes," Zelda said softly, touching the baby's tiny hand. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, holding his son and thinking about the miracle of how he and Zelda had found each other, Garrett knew exactly what the name should be. "Gabriel," he said. "It means God's messenger, because he's a message to us, a reminder of how blessed we are, of how everything we've been through was worth it to get to this moment." Gabriel Kincaid, Zelda repeated, smiling. It's perfect. Gabriel proved to be a healthy, happy baby who brought immense joy to the ranch. Garrett loved fatherhood, often found rocking his son to sleep while humming off key lullabies. Zelda sang to Gabriel constantly, and the baby seemed to recognize his mother's voice even in his earliest days, calming immediately when she sang. The ranch continued to prosper. Word spread about the quality of Kincaid beef, and they found steady buyers in Kearney and surrounding towns. By Gabriel's first birthday, they were able to expand their herd and hire a permanent ranch hand to help with the work. The small house that had seemed so spacious was beginning to feel cramped, and they made plans to add on rooms in the coming year. Life settled into a pattern of work and family, challenges and rewards. There were hard times, years when drought reduced their water supply or harsh winters took a toll on the herd. But they faced every difficulty together, their love and partnership growing stronger with each passing season. When Gabriel was 3, Zelda gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. 2 years later, another son arrived whom they called Samuel. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family, and the sounds of children's laughter filled the once quiet prairie. Garrett proved to be a devoted father, patient and loving, teaching his children about the land and animals, instilling in them the values of hard work and integrity. Zelda thrived as a mother, balancing the demands of raising children with helping manage the ranch. She sang to her babies as they had sung to Garrett on that fateful day, and her children grew up surrounded by music and love. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, she and Garrett would sit together on the porch they had built with their own hands, holding hands and watching the stars, still amazed by the life they had created. Martha remained a constant presence, a loving grandmother figure who spoiled the children and provided wisdom gained from decades of living. Harold and Ruth Mason became honorary grandparents as well, their own children grown and scattered, delighting in the Kincaid youngsters. The community around Kearney continued to grow, and the Kincaids became respected members, known for their honesty, hard work, and kindness. Years passed, marked by birthdays and holidays, by good harvests and lean ones, by the ordinary miracles of daily life. Gabriel grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Grace inherited her mother's voice and filled the house with song. Samuel showed a gift with horses that amazed even Garrett. On a summer evening in 1895, 17 years after that day when Garrett had nearly died, the whole family gathered on the now extensive porch for dinner. Gabriel, at 15, was nearly as tall as Garrett. Grace, 12 years old, helped her mother serve the meal while singing softly. Samuel, 10, chattered excitedly about a foal that had been born that morning. Martha, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, presided over the gathering with affection and gentle authority. After dinner, as the children played in the yard and Martha dozed in her rocking chair, Garrett and Zelda walked hand in hand to the small hill where he had proposed all those years ago. They came here sometimes, when they needed to remember, to reflect, to be grateful. "Do you ever think about that day?" Zelda asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "The day I found you, I think about it all the time," Garrett admitted. "I think about how close I came to missing all of this. Every morning when I wake up next to you, every time I see our children, every moment of this life we've built, I'm grateful. You gave me everything, Zelda. You gave me life itself. We gave each other everything," Zelda corrected, as she always did. "I was lost when I found you, Garrett. I thought I was traveling to my aunt's house to start a new life, but really, my life was waiting for me in that abandoned homestead. You were my destiny, my purpose, my home. Everything I have, everything I am is because we found each other." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land, their ranch, their legacy. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. Their children's laughter carried on the evening breeze. Somewhere in the house, they could hear Martha singing an old hymn. "Sing for me," Garrett requested softly, as he had countless times over the years. "Sing the song you sang that day, the one that brought me back." Zelda smiled and began to sing, her voice as beautiful as ever, perhaps even more so with the richness that came from years of joy and sorrow, laughter and tears. The melody rose into the evening air, carrying with it all the love and hope and gratitude that filled their hearts. Garrett closed his eyes and listened, transported back to that moment when he had been on the edge of darkness, when her voice had been the only light he could see. He remembered the journey from death to life, from despair to hope, from loneliness to love. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment. When the song ended, they held each other close. Two souls who had saved each other, who had built something beautiful from pain and hardship. Their story had begun with near tragedy, but had become a testament to the power of love, determination, and faith. They had found their place in the wild Nebraska prairie, had raised a family, had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. As darkness descended and stars began to emerge, they walked back to their home hand in hand, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Because they had each other, they had their children, they had their land. They had everything that mattered. And it had all begun with a voice in the darkness, calling a dying man back to life, giving him a reason to fight, to survive, to love. Their love story would be told for generations, a tale of how two lost souls found each other in the vast expanse of the American West, how they built a life from nothing, how they proved that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with a journey across miles, but with a journey of the heart. The Kincaid Ranch would stand for decades, a monument to what two people could accomplish when they refused to give up on each other or their dreams. And on quiet evenings when the wind whispered across the prairie, people swore they could still hear the faint sound of a woman singing, her voice full of love and hope, calling out across the years, reminding all who heard it that even in the darkest moments, there is always light to be found, always a voice to guide you home, always a reason to fight for one more day, one more breath, one more chance at happiness. Garrett and Zelda lived long, full lives, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren who would carry their story forward. They aged together gracefully, their love never diminishing but growing richer and deeper with each passing year. When Garrett finally passed away in his sleep at the age of 73, Zelda held his hand and sang to him one last time, her voice still beautiful despite her years, guiding him gently into the darkness, just as she had once called him back from it. She followed him less than a year later, dying peacefully in the house they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, her final breath a whisper of song. Their children kept the ranch running, honoring their parents' legacy by maintaining the values of hard work, integrity, and love that Garrett and Zelda had instilled in them. The story of how their parents met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that miracles could happen in the most unexpected ways, that love could bloom even in the harshest circumstances, that one voice, one act of compassion, could change everything. The little church in Kearney held a memorial service attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the Kincaids. Stories were shared of Garrett's fairness and honesty in business, of Zelda's generosity and kindness to anyone in need. The pastor spoke of how their love had been an example to the entire community, a beacon of hope that showed what was possible when two people committed fully to each other and to building something meaningful together. And so their story ended where it began, with song and love and the unbreakable bond between two souls who refused to let circumstances defeat them. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that would endure for generations. The Kincaid name became synonymous with integrity and perseverance in that corner of Nebraska, a testament to what could be achieved when fate, courage, and love converged in one perfect, miraculous moment on a hot July day in 1878, when a dying man heard an angel singing and chose to live.